Welcome, everyone, to the L7C podcast. And today we have, which we now call her, since she is one of the top people on the podcast, the queen of the L7C podcast, Chelsea Police, with us. How are you doing today, ma'am?
I'm good. That's quite the distinction.
I mean, you are the queen of the L7C. You're the only lady who, A, has been on and continues to come on. And my 2021 goal is to have more women on, but some of them are afraid. And you're not afraid, which makes you the queen.
All right. Well, I'll take it.
So today we have a jam-packed episode for you guys. We're going to be talking about Sarah Fuller, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly of that whole situation, which shouldn't be a situation. Chloe's going to give us a United States women's soccer team update on the latest that's going on with the lawsuit. We're going to talk about Chelsea's favorite NFL commentator, Chris Collinsworth, and the comments he had during the Steelers-Ravens game a little bit back. We're also going to talk about the people complaining about the NBA offseason and how short it is, and why they shouldn't be complaining if they look to the women counterparts. And we're just going to be talking about some other things, but those are some of the biggest things we're going to be talking about. So let's just hop right into Miss Sarah Fuller. By now, everyone should know Sarah Fuller. She made history as the first woman to play in a Power 5 game. She played with Vanderbilt. Unfortunately, Vanderbilt, I think, got smoked like 42-0. But she was able to get a squib take off, so she did get PT. Chelsea, what was your thought when first this happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I think it's a great opportunity for people to see that women are capable of being in a male-dominated sport, for one. Certainly, she received a ton of media and publicity from this announcement, from the happenings of all of this. You know, it was really cool to see that she won an SEC championship as a goalkeeper for Vanderbilt and then turned around to be on the football field filling a need that they had because of the pandemic, COVID-19, not being able to fill roster spots. So an incredible opportunity for her. Really cool for people to see. I saw a lot of tweets, young girls talking about how cool it was to be able to see an older representation of themselves getting an opportunity to be on the field and to show that girls can do the same things that boys can do, that, you know, women can do the same things that men can do. Certainly everybody did not feel that way, but I think from a progress standpoint, it was just really, really cool to see, particularly in my lifetime, and hopefully girls and women get more opportunities moving forward.
Right. And you just hinted on everyone did not feel that way. I do feel like it was more positive than negative. I would probably say 70% positive, but that minority of 30% was a very loud negative. And with Sarah, just some of the tweets that you and I have talked about that were shared, were people saying they hope she got slaughtered on a play. They couldn't grab someone from the guys' team. There's people who was like, is it sad that I want her to get like blasted? Things about I hope she gets clout, it's a publicity stunt. Can we get an OnlyFans instead? Team full of simps. Who cares? So I guess the first thing out of those one tweets is that they couldn't get someone from the Vanderbilt men's soccer team because they don't have a soccer team, right?
Correct. And that brought up questions of Title IX and why there's not a men's soccer team, and also Title IX as a defense for this not happening. And Title IX is often used as a defense without truly knowing what that law says and what it means. And Title IX is about equity. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a one-for-one situation with sports and other things, particularly with Title IX. It's talking about proportionality. So say, for instance, your overall student body. So we're talking about Vanderbilt, for instance. Their overall student body is 56% female and 44% male. Your student athlete conglomerate should mirror the general student body. And I think that's a misconception that people don't understand about Title IX. So using it as a defense for her not being on the field is misinformed. It's not a good defense. And there's a lot of nuances to Title IX that certainly don't make sense in this instance. So I was reading through a lot of tweets with Title IX, and I was just kind of laughing to myself because it's something that we study as people in the sport industry, and just the number of people who don't understand that federal law is not surprising, but it is always kind of astonishing to see that people don't necessarily do their research. But, you know, I posted something on Facebook about this a few days after it happened, and you can disagree with Vanderbilt's decision to put her on the field. Like, that's a whole different issue. Like, I don't agree with your disagreement, but you can have that opinion. That's fine. But wishing her ill will as your reason for disagreeing with that decision is completely wrong. That sends a terrible message. And anybody who has made that comment, I truly and sincerely hope that they don't have daughters. Because at the end of the day, they're saying to their own daughter that they don't belong in the same arena as other boys, men, etc. And for me, that's just not okay. So it's hard for me because, you know, I don't have kids, but I would like to think that if I had a daughter, I would be telling her that she can do anything that she wants. You know, obviously playing football is kind of a different animal, and there are some safety concerns, but to sit there and say that you hope that this college student who is 18, 19, 20 years old, that you hope that she gets physically injured because she's on the football field is disgusting, in my opinion.
And even to take it a step further from that, not just physically, I didn't want to say some of the other comments, but sexually as well. Yeah. In the locker room, guys can see what I'm saying with that there were some people saying, wishing her ill will, assaulted, things of that. And I think that's extremely crossing the line. And then someone like Ben Shapiro, I mean, he is a well-known conservative, radio host, author, all that thing. He posted his thing about Sarah Fuller, and from reading his stuff, his biggest problem was he won Specialty Player of the Week from the 30 single stars with kids, and he felt like that was just playing to go into political, but on the leftist media. So, what were your thoughts seeing Ben Shapiro's things like that? Because he is a big.
He is, and I think watching that video, I think he made some good points, but I felt like he was very condescending, and maybe that's just his method of distributing his information. I really don't watch a lot of Ben Shapiro, try to stay away from him as much as possible, but you know, I think the SEC giving her that accolade was recognizing that this is a big deal. Maybe it was a publicity stunt, I don't know. But at the end of the day, there's nobody else that's done it. So recognizing that this is something that is groundbreaking. And again, people have been debating her squib kick. It went 30 yards. But I listened to Pat McAfee talk about this, and he, you know, said she did exactly what she was supposed to do. The squib kick was on the ground. It wasn't returnable, didn't score points against her. You know, those are things that you look for. And yeah, maybe the distance wasn't that great, but let's be real. Vanderbilt, not a good football team. Any way you slice it, just not good. So what was a male kicker going to do any differently than she did? And so don't understand why that the distance of the kick is really that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Should the SEC have given her I don't know, special teams player of the week? I don't know. I don't think it hurts that they did. I think they're, again, just trying to show that they recognize how big of a deal and that this is an opportunity that presented itself and Vanderbilt took advantage. And I think maybe they appreciated that about that opportunity being there. But I don't really see any issues with that accolade being given to her.
Yeah, me either. I think my biggest thing with this whole situation we've already hit on is that if you don't agree with their decision to get her, whatever, then that's fine. But the Bill stuff not all right. And degrading normal people, like you said, showing their daughters that they can do anything and telling them, oh, this is just a publicity stunt. You really couldn't do this if you wanted to. And the other misconceptions that you've already hit on, she didn't take any of the guy's job on the team. The COVID cause like that the whole kicking unit was out. I think I don't know if it's a negative, but maybe just slight critique. I did see that she was trying to pump the team up or things like that. I just think that it's extremely hard, not just in sports, but just in the workplace when you're the new person trying to pump a group up when you haven't built that equity. That'd be my thing. I understand she's trying to do this and motivate.
Yeah, and I think, as a goalkeeper, thinking about her responsibility on the field, that's, partly her job. She sees the entire field as a goalkeeper. She's the last line of defense. She's calling out all the time. So I would venture to guess that was probably her role on the soccer team. And so I think some of that probably just translated. And it's really tough when you're such a competitive athlete and you see other people who are supposed to be competitive athletes just not even caring. And I should say that I don't know what it's like to be on the Vanderbilt football team. I don't know what's going on constantly. They're not very good. We've seen that they're I don't know what the culture is like. Their head coach ended up getting fired. So I don't know what the kind of morale is like. So, maybe she saw something in the moment that she was like, hey, I need to address this. Maybe this will help us moving forward. But I think it does take a lot of guts to step in with a team you've been with for a week or whatever it was and have the desire to say something to them when they're out getting beat, 40-0. So, I think there's a time and a place, and maybe that wasn't necessarily it. Had it been maybe a closer game and she had come in and done that, it maybe would have been more appropriate or had more of an effect. But I don't think you can fault her for at least trying. The other thing I think about is, had Vanderbilt had a men's soccer team and they brought in their goalkeeper, whoever, to kick for Vanderbilt that week, would that athlete have gotten the same sort of backlash and other things about being on the field? And the answer to that question is absolutely not. So if he had kicked 30 yards, people would have been like, oh, he did exactly what he was supposed to. And the coach coming out and saying, I didn't want to overextend her or, put her in a position that was going to, harm her because she's not used to kicking, certain distances or in a certain manner. If he had probably come out and said that about a male player, then nobody would have batted an eye and it would have been, yesterday's news, or it would have been the same old, same old. So I think it's just unbelievable that people had this type of reaction to her and to what she did.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing with this, obviously the representation matters, but representation can be hindered in what's going on in your own home. You talked about some of the people who asked if she had an OnlyFans or wishing sexual assault on her in the locker room. A majority of those people, they're going to be parents or are parents and have, either a boy or girl. So you're going to have they'll have girls, and you'll have some families where their parents are telling their little daughters that they can achieve these things. But then you also have the families where the little daughters are walking in the living room and they see their full-grown father or whoever cussing at the TV and calling Sarah terrible names because they feel like women shouldn't be there. Girls are seeing that as well. They're always going to believe that women shouldn't be there. So,
yeah, and I will say, if as a parent, you don't want your daughter playing football, that's your choice, and I won't argue that with a parent. But to sit there and degrade this young girl because she was put in this position just because she is a woman is where I have a problem. And again, those little girls watching, or if, God forbid, they see some of these comments later on in life, that's going to be heartbreaking to them to think that their parent, their mom, dad, whoever, doesn't believe in them. And that's really why I had such strong feelings about this, because like I said in the past, women are here and they're here to stay, and they're going to be in those positions, and society's just got to accept that because it is what it is.
Yeah, and I know we'll talk about it later, about the tweet about this is the year to be a girl dad. No matter what year it is, there always seems to be significant progress, but then you really see the dark side of what not a good portion, but what millions of other people actually think about women. And it's disheartening because you think there's been no progress made, but there has been. So congrats, Sarah Fuller. You did great. History maker. Don't let the comments get to you. Don't let the media people who don't like what you did get to you. And we got supporters at the L7C podcast. And speaking of top tier soccer women, let's go to your favorite team, United States women's soccer team, and they settled part of their lawsuit. So what happened with that?
Yeah, so there's two parts to their lawsuit. One is the equal pay, and the other is equal working conditions. So they settled with U.S. Soccer on the equal working conditions portion of the lawsuit, which basically talks about accommodations, chartered flights, and venue options. And I don't know the exact terms of the deal, but what I can say is I venture to guess in terms of venues, there's going to be something in there that says they won't play on artificial turf anymore. That was a big point of contention, particularly with the 2015 World Cup in Canada, I think. Mm-hmm. I think it was in Canada. I can't remember if it was 2011 or 2015. But anyway, that was a huge thing that people, I guess the professional soccer players, the national teams, that's what I'm trying to say, were really upset when it was announced that they were going to be playing on artificial turf. The big argument was that the Men's World Cup would never be played on artificial turf.
Okay.
That's always been something that the women have talked about, that it's not fair. It causes injuries. I can't tell you the number of people that have torn ACLs by playing on artificial turf. So I would venture to guess that's number one in terms of venues and how they're selected. In terms of the other points of the settlement, I'm not exactly sure what those terms are, but it sounds like it was, obviously they settled, but both sides seem to be really happy with the agreement they've come to. The other half of the lawsuit, which has not been settled and actually was dismissed by a judge, is the equal pay portion of the lawsuit. The national team, the players are planning on appealing that decision. So we'll have to see probably in 2021 what's going to happen with that. But the interesting thing is their CBA will run out in 2021. So they're going to have to renegotiate anyway. So it'll just be interesting to see how that all plays out, because obviously there's ongoing litigation with the lawsuit, the appeal, whatever shakes out with all of that. But then U.S. Soccer and the women are going to have to come back to the table and try and hash out an agreement where they feel that they are being paid what they deserve for the work that they do. And additionally, the men's CBA, I don't know what year it runs out, but it's in the near future. And I think they're waiting to see what happens with the women's deal so that they can ride their coattails and get an equally or better CBA than what the women have. So, it's a very interesting time right now. And I hope that the women are able to come to an agreement with U.S. Soccer. But if they're not, I guarantee they're ready to boycott if they need to. The Olympics, they probably won't boycott the Olympics, but with upcoming tournaments and anything like that, I think they're ready to do that if they need to.
Okay. So with the collective bargaining agreement ending in 2021 and them appealing this, which would also probably be in 2021, and I guess just for normal people who don't listen to sports, think of the collective bargaining agreement as your working union contract that just correlate the two. So what would be, and you said them sitting out things like that, I guess for normal people too, is if you don't like your union contract, you can go on strike. So if the women sat out / went on strike until they got equal pay thing or things of that, what do you think would be the ramifications for that?
I don't know. To be honest, this has actually been something that's happened before. The 99ers threatened to strike a long, long time ago, and they were able to get the younger national teams to agree as well. So basically, U.S. Soccer was like, well, if you guys, our senior team, don't want to play, we'll go to our U21s, U23s, whatever they are, the next step down. And they said, we're not going to play. And they said, okay, we'll go down to the next age group, and so on and so forth. And so the entire, U.S. national team organization, from the senior team to the youth team, came together and said, we're united in this. If we don't get what we want or we can't come to an agreement of some sort, we're just not going to play. And I think that's a testament to the type of people that they are. And, the organization has grown so much. I don't know that they'll be able to do something similar. But certainly I think the senior team has enough influence on the younger players that they could make some serious change. But truthfully, I don't know what the ramifications are other than, just not playing. I know there has been some talk that the new administration will hold funding for the 2026 World Cup that's being hosted in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico if equal pay is not achieved. So that's something that potentially helps the U.S. women, hurts U.S. soccer a little bit, but how that all plays out and how that's even possible, I really don't know at this point.
Found it. And I was just reading, what is this? U.S. District Judge Gary Klosner. He was the one who dismissed the pay claim in May because his thing was stated the women rejected the pay-to-play structure similar to the one in the men's agreement and accepted greater base salaries and benefits than the men, who failed to obviously qualify in 2018 when that happened. So what are the women's soccer team's benefits? Because do they get maternity leave, things like that? Like, what are their benefits?
They do get maternity leave, although that was a hard-fought battle. And actually, FIFA has now implemented policies about maternity leave for any FIFA affiliated organization. So national teams can't kick off their players because they've had children. So that's actually massive that the governing body of the entire sport has come out and implemented that, particularly because people have not had a lot of faith in FIFA's acceptance of women in the game of soccer. So that's a huge step in the right direction. I haven't read what exactly it says, but I think it's obviously better than absolutely nothing, which is what we were dealing with previously. The pay structures are complicated, and yes, it's true that they, took the larger base salaries and benefits over the men's pay structure, which pays them per game. But at the time that this collective bargaining agreement was agreed upon, it was the best possible outcome for them. And now they're recognizing that, hey, we deserve more, and that's where this is coming from. But if you put some of those top players from the men's side and the women's side and compare their salaries, the women don't make nearly as much despite having those base salaries and additional benefits. So, it's hard because it's almost like comparing apples to oranges because those collective bargaining agreements are so different. But at the end of the day, the women just want equity and they want to make sure that they're getting paid what they deserve. And they typically play a lot more games than the men do. And so the men are getting paid more per game, even though they play fewer games throughout the year. And at one point, it was that the women only got paid if they won. The men got paid no matter what. And so, again, it's this process of kind of understanding the men's structure versus the women's structure and how we can get to this point that we are paying them equally. And the women have 4 stars. Like, there's no debating that. Like, they have clearly performed better in tournaments than the men have. Yes, it's 2 separate tournaments. Yes, competition is different. But at the end of the day, they're competing on the world stage and they're producing. The men are not. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I would love to see them reach a deal and that everybody can move forward in terms of being happy and as a governing body that the U.S. Soccer recognizes what the women deserve. But we'll see. Litigation is hard.
Yeah, litigation is very hard. And just, for the normal Joe Schmo, if a team's better than the other team, brings in more revenue than the other team, has more championships than the other team, has more well-known players than the other team, if you just put 2 blank resumes next to each other, listed their accomplishments, things of that nature, you would think this team should make more than this team. There shouldn't even be a question. But when you tag the U.S. women's soccer team and the men's soccer team, then people are like, well, it's just, again, what we talked about with Sarah's thing about being women, that is unfair because they're better in every category than the men's soccer team. It is what it is. And they're getting paid significantly less than their male counterparts, which it just needs to be addressed. I know in a tweet, which I don't even know if he was just using for votes or whatnot, at that time, presidential candidate Joe Biden was talking about don't the fight's over, talking about if he's elected president, we'll try and get a World Cup or whatever fund, but I don't know if that was typical politics jargon or if that's something he's going to do. So we're just going to have to keep an eye on that. Chelsea, anything else about the lawsuit and the updates before we go to the next topic?
No, I don't think so. But I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of if we blindly look at their resumes, not knowing who each team is, like almost certainly you would side with the women's team just by what they've accomplished. And most people don't know that the women actually bring in more revenue than the men. And you tell people that and you're like, that's not true. It's all about viewership and blah, blah, blah. And the reality is the women were way more visible than the men were. And people did not want to attend men's games. People after the 2018 World Cup were so upset by that result. The fact that the men did not make the World Cup, didn't even qualify for the World Cup, that attendance numbers, ticket sales, everything decreased significantly for the men. Not to mention, after winning the most recent World Cup in 2019, Nike started offering the women's jerseys in men's cut jerseys. They outsold any other apparel from the men's team. So don't tell me that the women don't generate revenue, because that's 100% false.
Yeah. I mean, that's just how it is. Hopefully, litigation, things like that, it gets better. Hopefully, we don't reach I don't want to call it a doomsday situation, but anytime you hear sitting out in strike, that's not good for TV and jersey sales and things like that. So hopefully we don't get to that. But let's talk about your favorite NFL announcer, Chris Collinsworth, during the Ravens-Steelers Wednesday night game, because it got pushed back so many times it's open. He was talking in reference to Pittsburgh. He was talking about everyone's a fan. In particular, the ladies I met, they have really specific questions about the game. And I'm like, wow, you're just blown away by how strong the fans are in this town. That was not taken very well by people. A lot of people felt like he was extremely downplaying a woman's ability to actually know what's going on with their city's favorite football team, and he since apologized. I joke that he's your favorite NFL commentator. I know he's not. So what do you think, and A, when you first heard those comments by Chris?
So putting my bias aside, because I could go without listening to Chris Collinsworth for a really long time, but when I was watching that game, I heard that comment, and in my head, I said to myself, I was like, Twitter is not going to like that. Social media is not going to like that. He is going to have to answer to some people based on that comment. And I could tell I made a face as he said it. And to be honest, I don't think it was intended to be malicious. I truly do believe it was intended to be a comment or a compliment. But dude, you gotta be careful. I know it's nitpicky to, drag him on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is. But you're an announcer. You're in the limelight. You're expected to meet some certain standards, and using that phrase is really what got him in trouble. And again, I don't think it was intended to be malicious, but word choice, and it matters. And I saw a lot of comments, about people being upset about what he said, but also were like, heck yeah, like I'm a Pittsburgh sports fan. I know what I'm talking about. And it was a lot of women, defending him. And and again, like I don't think it was anything that people really needed to be really mean about or anything, but I think it certainly needed to be brought to his attention about the optics of it and how it could be offensive. You and I were talking about this after it happened and his apology, and I don't know. It's hard for me to know whether he truly was apologetic or if somebody told him he needed to apologize. I hope it's the former and not the latter, but at the end of the day, like you just can't say things like that, whether you mean it offensively or not.
Yeah, I think with Chris's comments, I mean, I heard it. I was watching the game live, and I actually didn't think anything of it when I first heard it. And then I think what really got it really going was the way he said "wow," because it was like a wow, like a surprise wow, like we weren't expecting them to know anything. And even before the wow, it was like in particular the ladies. If he simply would have just cut his story short, like everyone's a fan in Pittsburgh. I ran into a group of people, and they were asking me questions about the game. Like, I don't think he needed to. I get what he was trying to do. I think he was trying to show that women do care about the Pittsburgh Steelers. So he really put an emphasis on that. But I think it backfired in the fact that why were you so shocked that women know about their favorite sports team? Hence why some of the people from that town were defending him. And Chris, I mean, he's had a history of mess ups on misunderstandings on the microphone in his time in Sunday Night Football. So I think this could have not been a story if he just would have rephrased his things. He didn't have to put an emphasis on women and wow, like he didn't, like they weren't expected to know things about their sports team. He could have just said a group of fans, things like that, and called it a day. And then even with his apology, I never believe anyone apologizes on their own accord when you are signed with a multi-billion-dollar company.
100%. It's money. Like you can't. If you don't apologize, then you're going to face the consequences from your network, and the network's going to face consequences from people who are upset that he doesn't apologize. Now, what precedent does that set by saying you have to apologize even if you're not sorry? Like that is demeaning in and of itself. Like it's hard to gauge whether somebody is truly apologetic, and this happens all the time where we see somebody put out a statement where it's, them typing in their notes of their iPhones and then posting it to Twitter. Like, I appreciate the sentiment maybe, but without actually them saying that statement or, going to those group of fans or saying something on TV and saying, like, I genuinely did not mean for this to happen. It's hard to gauge whether or not they're truly sorry. And even if they do make a statement on TV, they can just be saying things to say things. So it's really hard, and I'm sure it's really difficult for people who are in those positions for, people to debate their lives, what they know, what they don't know, what they mean, what they don't mean, and certainly give them a lot of credit for being in those roles. But there's just times you just have to know that there are things you can't say.
Yeah. Once you're in the public eye, everything changes for you. If you would have said that to his buddies at a dinner at their house, there'd be nothing of it. But in the public eye, you're on the biggest show of the week. Sunday Night Football is the highest rated thing of the week. So everyone's watching you. You just got to watch what you say on that. Let's talk about the NBA and WNBA offseason. You brought up if you wanted to talk about this in depth and talk about the people who are making a big deal of the NBA offseason, but they don't know what the women go through. So I want to talk about that.
Yeah, so I saw a tweet the other day that was talking about how the NBA offseason is the shortest it's ever been. It's only 71 days, something along those lines, from the end of finals to the start of the next season. And people were talking about how that's such a big deal. Like the players don't have enough time to recuperate, yada, 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 whatever you want to say. The first comment I read was talk to the WNBA, because most of them end their season and immediately turn around and go play overseas. So they have zero off season. And they do that because they don't make enough money to be able to support themselves through the off season of the WNBA. So yes, the WNBA does have an off season, but most of the players who are WNBA players don't stop playing. They go to, some of them play in Russia, Turkey, so European teams, etc., because they still need to make money to support themselves. So when I hear people complaining about the NBA getting only 71 days off, that's 2.5 months, a little less, when WNBA players get next to no off season because their European or whatever overseas league gets done and they immediately go back into training camp or whatever for the WNBA, and it starts all over again. So don't tell me that NBA players aren't fit, strong, capable of playing another season with a shortened off.
Yeah. So a couple things I just want to say about this particular topic is, I don't think a lot of people know that about the WNBA, that a lot of these women go, as soon as they're done with the off season, as soon as they're done with their regular season state in the playoffs, if they make it that far in the finals, they go play overseas for money to support themselves or each other, their children, family, things like that. So with that being said, if you're playing your regular season, if you're good enough to playoffs in the finals, then you go fly over and play in overseas. You're playing that full time, and you're not, as a woman player, you're not having the time to recuperate yourself. So you're almost going in a constant cycle where you don't get the time to relax unless it seems bad and you may have a little bit more time. But then when you're doing that, you're putting the strain on your body, and that makes your career in the WNBA shorter because you're going round and round. And then by the time you potentially can't play anymore because of injuries from playing 2 leagues a whole year, you might not even, I don't know what their pension plans and things like that is, or their financial things, but you might not have enough to retire fully or things like that. So that's a bad thing, and I think they have a CBA agreement coming up either next year or the year after. So they need to get that pay increased as well. I don't think any of the WNBA players on this next CBA are going to make $50 million a year, but I think they need to be compensated promptly for all the things that they do on and off the field, and that's really all I have to say about on that too.
Yeah, and just to add, it's not even low level players. I mean that just like, people who get paid very little. Brianna Stewart she's a big time player, went overseas to play after the WNBA season ended, and she tore her Achilles over there.
Yep.
So that's a good example of the ramifications of not having an off season. So she ended up missing the entire WNBA season after that injury. The recent number 1 pick, Arike Gumbo, you know who I'm talking about, played at Notre Dame. She's playing overseas right now. So it's not just players who are, on like minimum contracts or minimum salaries. There are number 1 picks, some of the best players in the league that feel that they need to go overseas to make a livable wage. And there's this common misconception that the women are asking for NBA type money. They're not. They're just asking for more. They're asking for what's, right. You see, Donovan Mitchell just got a max extension, $195 million. Some of that, would go a long way for the women. And again, they're not asking for $195 million, but they're asking for something that's equitable, that makes sense for the work that they're doing as professional athletes.
Yeah, and just a tidbit side note on Donovan, he is donating like $12 million, I think, to like his elementary school or something.
Yeah, I saw that.
So, but yeah,
no cards.
That's the misconception that they want that type of money. And like we've said on numerous podcasts before, that unfortunately the way some of this, if progress is done, is if the person who this is not affecting helps. Right. So that would be the WNBA. I mean, the NBA players helping the WNBA players, championing for them. I think the biggest star in the NBA right now is LeBron. And if LeBron came out and said the women paid a comfortable thing, I'm going to do whatever I can to do this, X, Y, Z, it'd go a long way. Unfortunately, I think with the WNBA, one of the biggest tragedies that stopped their progress was Kobe dying, because he was a big component of the WNBA. Obviously, he's the one who got the girl dad thing that was really popping after he passed away, since he was the father of all girls. And with him passing, there really hasn't been another Omega NBA legend or current player to really be like, I'm going to champion for the WNBA.
Yeah, I did see Dwayne Wade listed the orange hoodie that's been, a huge staple of the WNBA as a popular gift or a must-have gift for Christmas this year, which I thought was really cool, but, certainly not the same thing as stepping up and saying, hey, what can we do to make this more equitable, or even what can we do to get some additional funding? Because we do know that the WNBA and the NBA are tied to one another, or rather the WNBA is tied to the NBA. So there's ways that they could increase some funding if they truly wanted to, and if they really got creative with some things. But, we'll have to see if that happens, or if and when it happens.
Yeah, and just to go to the WNBA, just to go into the next thing, that you shared this interesting tweet, which I found super interesting, that the Women's National Soccer League, or the team, because it has NWSL league.
Yeah, it's the league.
The league. And the WNBA were the top two highest Twitter engagement rates of 2020. That they were ahead of the NFL, which we think about like this football, crazy. The NBA, MLB, NHL, MLS. And they're just receiving, even though they're the top two, they're only receiving 4% of all sports media coverage and 1% of sports sponsorship dollars. And nothing was invested in women's sports. Now, seeing how those two were the top two things on Twitter, and our generation and below, a lot of people get their news from Twitter. So, and them not getting the exposure, because I mean, this tweet's right, because I can go on ESPN and Fox right now and just scroll through, and I'll probably get to the copyright thing at the bottom before they have anything about influence sport.
Yeah, that's not wrong, and it's very interesting because the NWSL teams and some WNBA teams have been at the top of engagement individually, like Racing Louisville FC, who hasn't even played a game yet, has consistently been at the top of engagement for Twitter for the last several weeks. I think they were beat out last week or 2 weeks ago after Maradona passed away. So there was a lot of engagement for Napoli, which is the team that he had played for, which makes sense. But it's interesting to me that people think that nobody cares about women's sports. And I know I've said this numerous times throughout this podcast, but you know what I think it really is that the women's teams and the leagues recognize how much harder they have to work in order to be seen. And they put the work in and they make it happen. And you know, I also think that the men's teams feel like, hey, we're visible. ESPN puts us on TV every night. You can find us on the webpage. We don't have to work as hard because we're visible. Whereas the women's teams, the women's leagues recognize we have to make ourselves visible because we only receive 4% of media coverage. So we have to do whatever we can to make ourselves visible because other entities won't do it. Yeah. And I think that then shows that there is an interest. And I don't understand why networks like ESPN and Fox Sports don't understand that. Like, you see this Twitter engagement, you see Instagram engagement, that people are out there liking, commenting, interacting with those accounts, and yet we don't have the heart to put them on TV. Like, that absolutely blows my mind. But shout out to all of those social media coordinators, managers, whoever they are. Like, they've been top notch. And in the year of this pandemic, like, I think that says a lot about them and a lot about the work that they put in, whether they're men, women, whoever. But to make those organizations visible is incredible.
Agreed. Even now, ESPN, Fox, FS1, none of the women's sports are ever topics on the debate shows, which are driving force in sports. So I think one of the steps there, I think I talked about this before, is seeing them to be topic. The only time I ever see them as a topic is when there's MMA involved, because Dana White did a great job of promoting his female fighters to an extent. It's really dropped since Ronda left. He was putting everything into Ronda. So hopefully 2021, we can see an improvement going forward. Chelsea, was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we actually potentially sign off?
The last thing I was going to say that I find interesting, like, you know, on ESPN or CBS Sports, some of those apps, like, you can put in the teams that you want notifications about.
Yeah.
There's no option to put in women's teams. So That's like to know the women's basketball team at Louisville. I like to, check their scores because a lot of times I can't watch their games because they're on the ACC network, which is a whole other thing. But I can't even select them to get notifications. And that's an easy fix that app developers could go in and make that an option. And I know there have been people on Twitter that have consistently asked that question, like, why am I not able to do that? Or even the women's national team, who they are the number one soccer team in the entire world, and I can't even get notifications about when they're playing. So something as simple as that is a starting point. And I'm not saying that you have to televise every single women's game, every single time that they're playing, but give them a chance at least, and do as much marketing as you do for a Thursday night MAC game. Like, nobody cares about MACtion. Let's be real. And you could put on a 5 versus a 20 seed women's basketball game in place of that football game, and people would probably watch it if you advertise it. So there's little things that these, network executives could do. And I know we've talked about this, but it just blows my mind that 4% number has been that way for years, and that there's not been any uptick in how women's sports are covered, and that, leagues like the NWSL and WNBA have to do so much work on their own to be visible.
Yeah. I think the last thing I actually want to say was about the thing from the Champions League from Kate Abdos about 2020 is the year it matters most to be a girl dad. The video is very good, very touching. I think a minute and something changed. My only problem was actually the tagline Champions League used of 2020 is the year it matters to be a girl dad. I didn't like that tagline. Being that every year it should matter to be a girl dad. It should have taken 2020 for people to realize that. But that's just me nitpicking. I have a with that.
Yeah, and I think that tagline, I think, was just more so to show that, yes, girl dads should be girl dads all the time. But I think, with Kobe's death, unfortunately, kind of brought this to the forefront. And Elle Duncan's video about being a girl dad and what that means, I think, just kind of started this massive movement. And I see that hashtag on Twitter all the time. I can't remember who it was recently had a daughter, and he's a professional athlete, and he was like, yeah, now I'm a girl dad. And I see people with t-shirts that have girl dad written on them. So I think 2020 was the year that it became less taboo to champion the fact that you are a girl dad. And obviously my dad is a girl dad, and he was my high school soccer coach. So he was a girl dad for a lot of people without, truly being their biological father. And, I respect him for that role. And I think that it's so important to recognize how important that is. And, I think going forward from here on, that people are going to recognize how important that is, and continue to use that hashtag and understand that being a dad of girls is just as cool as being a dad of boys. And, it stinks that it took 2020 for that to maybe become so popular and for people to finally recognize that. But hey, progress is progress. And if we can continue to show girls how cool it is to be a girl, and that you can play sports and be active and be successful, I think that's a move in the right direction.
It is. My only concern with that and it being a hashtag is that it's a hashtag. And obviously I don't know the millions of people who use it on social media. So I don't know if some of those people are trolling or they just want to be cool and say that they are. For progress to continue happening, after you've initially said you're a girl dad, you don't need to post it every time. Actually go out there and do the stuff. Go out there, support your daughters, your daughter's friends, your grandpa, your grandchildren, your granddaughters, things like that. Go out there and actually do something to promote change. And even if it's just small, talking to your buddies who aren't that, familiar with what that hashtag means or why representation matters in women's sports, things like that. Just simply educating friends who might not be on the same track will go a long way for not just the United States, but the planet to one day 100% see women's sports as equal to the
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I think that's a great point about, educating people who may not have daughters. And in the case of Sarah Fuller, I had one dad come in and, responded to somebody's comment and said, hey, like, this is not okay. That maybe would have changed that person's outlook. I'm sure there were people who defended her, left and right in some of those comments, but as you got down through and they just kept getting worse and worse, like you don't want to even deal with other replies. So, there definitely are those people out there, and I'm sure there are those people out there who just use the hashtag to use it to look cool. But I like to think that, girl dads who maybe had such respect for Kobe won't be those people who will use it just to use it. But, there's good and bad of all these hashtags, but I like to think that there's a positive outlook and that, society is getting better as a result.
Yeah, we're just going to have to wait and see. We'll see what happens in 2021. Chelsea, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off here today?
I don't think so. We talked about a lot today.
We did, and then we hit an hour. Well, not really an hour because we had those couple minutes working on the mic issues. Still like 50-something minutes.
Yeah.
So with that being said, thank you everyone for listening to the USWNT podcast. Thank you, Chelsea, for being on. As of recording right now, it is December, and Chelsea, hence why she is also the queen of this, is in the top 5 for first place with her first podcast, Women in Sports. I don't know if those numbers have changed. So Chelsea is trying to show you guys out there in a podcast where everyone else is a guy and you can come in as a woman and not only do well, but be the number one person on the thing.
Yeah, let's go. Get me to number 1.
And Chelsea will definitely be back for the end of year podcast that we are planning with everyone. So you will hear from her again before 2020 is over. And then when 2021 starts, we'll definitely be back with all things women's sports, because if ESPN and Fox aren't going to give you any updates, we definitely will. And with that being said, thank you everyone for listening to the L7C. Thank you for listening to this episode of the L7C podcast. Be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all social media platforms, and we'll be talking to you guys soon. Take care.